Welcome, everyone, to this week's episode of 15 Minutes into Big Idea. We're glad to have you with us. As always, we are at episode number 206, so we've been cranking along a little while. But if you're new with us and you haven't followed us on Facebook or Instagram, take a second and do that while we're going through this introduction and reminder, especially if you're on your phone. Just click on over, do that, like us, follow us there so you can get the latest updates on our content. There we post supplementary content to kind of go along with us and help to further frame our understanding of the passage. And also you get reminders about the various episodes that you got. So maybe you don't check your podcast app all that often. You just kind of listen whenever you think about it. Well, if you're following us there, you'll get those updates. Furthermore, check us out on YouTube at the Mended Collective. Follow that on Facebook and Instagram as well. If you're watching me, you already know this, but we're posting these as video podcasts as well, so you can get video and audio, and maybe that helps to communicate just a little bit more. If you're already watching, go ahead and subscribe to us so you can get those in your feed. And hit the bell for notifications so you don't miss a single episode and all the other wonderful things we've got coming down the pipe in 2024. Really excited about that and looking forward to sharing more with you. For today, let's look at Philippians chapter 4, verses 8 and 9. Philippians chapter 4, verses 8 and 9. Finally, brothers and sisters, whatever is true, whatever is honorable, whatever is right, whatever is pure, whatever is lovely, whatever is commendable, if there's any excellence, or if anything is worthy of praise, think about these things. As for the things you have learned and received and heard and seen in me, practice these things, and the God of peace will be with you. Today's series is the first installment of a three-part series about the list that we just read, which is a powerful description of the ways Christians should govern their thoughts. And this list is deeply connected to what we've examined in the past 2 weeks. This list is both the pursuit and the prize of the peace of God. It's the pursuit and the prize of the peace of God. At the end of this passage, notice it says, the God of peace will be with you. And in the previous text, we saw that the peace of God would guard us. So we've got the God of peace and the peace of God both here in this text, surrounding specifically the list that we're looking at. So the connection between these two lists isn't random. They're deeply and fundamentally united. We're going to explore that connection more as we go through the text because we can't avoid it. But to quickly review, we learned in the last couple of weeks that when anxiety comes, we shouldn't give extra mental effort to increasing the intensity of those thoughts. We shouldn't turn our thoughts to thoughts of anxiety when they pop into our heads. We can't allow ourselves to spin out of control with emotion or worry and haste. We do need to think carefully about our problems and apply wisdom in order to respond in a godly way, but those sorts of reactions aren't going to help us bring that result about, which is what we really want. Instead, we need to turn ourselves to the truth of God and rejoice in Him. We need to act with gentleness. We need to set our minds on hope and pour out our requests to God with thanksgiving. These things aren't to ignore our problems, but they are to reframe our problems and get a fuller, truer, more Christ-like perspective on the situations that seem too big for us. This is going to result in the peace of God and will give us the mind that we will read about today. It's going to give us the mind that we'll read about today. When we have the peace of God within us, we will naturally think about the things that we've read on this list, but we'll also be blessed by thinking about them. And so with that being the mind of peace, we should seek to pursue those things in our joy, our moderation, our hope, our pleading, and our thanks. Today's big idea is that Christ expands categories of good. All right? Big idea is that Christ expands categories of good. To understand that, we're going to think about number 1, think on the true. Number 2, meditate on the honorable. And 3, dwell on the right. Think on the true, meditate on the honorable, and dwell on the right. As you might have guessed with the list, our words are going to be true, honorable, and right, as the verse says. So this word, true. Definitions of what is true and how do we know what truth is are deep, and they are, quite frankly, very complex. And a lot of time has been spent thinking about that. And these are some philosophical questions that are very difficult. But we're going to take a very simple approach to it. We're going to take a very simple heuristic as we think about what truth is. For the purpose of our conversations today, we're going to think about truth as that which accords with reality. All right, we're going to presuppositionally suppose that God is the standard of reality. And we'll say a proposition or a fact is true or false if it accords with God's understanding of true or false, respectively, whatever that means. You'll notice that's going to be a theme throughout all of these. about God and his understanding and his standard of these things is of critical importance as we think about them. We need to have minds that look for, that focus upon, and seek to bring about truth in our hearts and in our lives and in the hearts and lives of others. What we set our minds on is what we're going to seek after. Jesus says the truth will make us free. And in times of stress and anxiety, lies, deceit, and falsehood often exacerbate the problems. As we've continually talked about, this practice that God has given to us in the previous verses of rejoicing and thanksgiving and things like that are about the practice of focusing our minds and hearts on what is true. It's about reframing our perspective. And sometimes the reasons we get anxious are because we don't really know what to do. We've misevaluated the significance of something, though. We don't know what to do, and we're like, well, I got to do something, and we don't realize that what's going on isn't actually that big a deal. Sometimes we're making too big a deal of it. But there's other times when we aren't, right? There's other times we aren't. But sometimes we are, all right? You're saying we are, we aren't. Yeah, I know. Let me give you an example. Maybe this will help. Suppose we have a friend or acquaintance that isn't as friendly to us as they usually are. And so a heart of anxiety is going to start to read all manner of negative things about our relationship into that. Pretty soon we're freaking out about it as though we've lost them as a friend. And so when they text us, we're short with them back, and that just throws things further into a cycle of unhealthiness. Further, we need to mention, we mention this falling out that we've had with a friend, and it affects their relationship with them when it wasn't even a falling out. We just took something a little too harshly. We didn't necessarily have the truth. Now, let me say this. Is the loss of a friend painful? Absolutely. Absolutely it is. Is the loss of a friendship and betrayal of trust hurtful? Yeah, absolutely. The point is, though, that if that's not what's actually going on, we don't need to bring that pain on ourselves. We do damage to ourselves when we intentionally inflict heartache over things that aren't true. That's not helpful. And sometimes we can bring anxiety into our lives whenever we don't break off a relationship. When we think about overreacting in a situation, ending a friendship, and all that heartache, sometimes if we don't view things through the lens of truth, we can continue a relationship that we don't need to when God hasn't told us to. The determiner of what's good there is what's true, and the truth will allow us to escape the anxiety that's coming. And we shouldn't allow falsehood to increase that. The next word that we want to think about is honorable. That is, Paul's calling us to turn our minds towards things that bring about, that lead to, or facilitate a proper honor. Our thoughts should not be focused on undercutting, subverting, or thwarting those who are in positions over us. We should not send our thoughts towards ways in which we can overthrow the right position of those who are in authority. We should seek to bring about their honor. This is most likely to happen in work scenarios or situations where our boss is maybe not managing up to our standards of competence. We think we need to wrest control of the situation, and to do so and dishonor them is just fine if that's what it takes. Furthermore, we need to focus our thoughts on things that lead to the proper honor of others. And as we think about the proper honor of others that we need to bring about, we need to make sure that we ourselves are thinking thoughts that they can be honored. We need to live our lives in such a way that if our minds were put on display for others to see, it could be viewed with honor. When we know we're being watched, we're often on our best behavior. And the thoughts of being seen by others, especially God, can be enough to bring about our right behavior. And an action that we might otherwise engage in, we'll not engage in it because we know, hey, God's watching. God is listening to our thoughts of our heart. Perhaps thinking to myself, what would other people think if I had this thought? That's not just a vain pride, because nobody's going to see your thoughts. But allowing that to be a test and a marker of, hey, would this be something that's approved? Or would it be something that's not approved? And that can allow us to judge our hearts and our thoughts. You might be reasonable to object and say, well, everybody looking at my thoughts, there's some thoughts I can't control. They just pop into my head, and that's all I can do with it. And that's absolutely the case. There's certainly intrusive thoughts that are not helpful to us or don't come about because we will them. But the honorable mind is going to not feed those thoughts. Because here's the thing, if everybody was looking at your thoughts, they too know that they have intrusive thoughts. And so the question is not what is the random and depraved things that may pop into our heads. The question is, how do we get them out of our mind? And how do we focus on things that have honor? In some ways, it shows a greater honor. Not the fact that you never have a bad thought, although that would be an honorable thing with the way you allow your mind to be framed. But in some sense, the greater honor is what we do with unsightly things and how we bring them into subjection to Christ. The final word that we want to look at today is right. Christians should be people who think on things that are right. Now, you may ask how this differs from the word true. If someone asks about what's true, we might say, or if someone says something that we agree is true, we might say, hey, that's right, in order to affirm it as a true fact. However, this word right is more than about the truth value of a proposition. It's about justice, about righteousness and fairness. And other translations choose those words of just and righteous, and that's probably the correct word for what's going on here. The word focuses on that which brings about fairness, justice, or equality. We need to foster thoughts that are concerned with fairness and truth. There's two ways that we fail to do this. First is in overzealous fault-finding. Second is in wishful idealization, which kind of goes back to a couple of the things we had in our example previously. Overzealous fault-finding and wishful idealization. We might call this overzealous fault-finding a critical spirit. It approaches every situation with what's wrong, and it can never be pleased. Nothing is ever good enough, and it refuses to acknowledge the good in situations and only find the bad. Now, you may say, isn't that being untruthful? Well, it's not that it necessarily points out things that are untrue, but it doesn't point out the whole truth. You know, a parent might demonstrate this attitude in dealings with their child by never giving praise and always criticizing when the child has done something that is by and large good. With this attitude, nothing is ever good enough, and it can't see rightly because all it can see is the negative. On the other hand, the wishful idealist only sees the good. They see everything through rose-colored glasses. They ignore the bad and the negative things and only look to the good. Again, with a parent, this is one who never sees the faults of their child. And it's always positivity and forgiveness, and really it just ends up being self-delusion. Both of these are unjust. Giving chastisement or reward that are not due is not a righteous action. The mind of justice is going to view all of this together and do its best to view all people involved to make sure they get what's fair in their circumstances and their actions. This brings us to the end of the study and this kind of start of the list. That's a really powerful one that should shape how we think as Christians. The call of Christians is to think on these particular things or in these particular manners as an expression and pursuit of the peace of God. Specifically, we need to lead our minds towards that which is true and honorable and righteous. Notice this gives us a standard of Christian thoughts that's higher. It shows us that what we can think about is more constricted than what other people can think about. Christ must have a strict hold on our thought life. It's not just about, true or false that Christians can think about and should think about. They have more standards and higher standards than other people have. And so a Christian's assessment of whether or not a thought should be entertained, whether or not a thought should be considered, and whether or not it should be dwelt upon is a higher level. It can't just include truth, but it must include truth and honor and righteousness. So let's ask some questions to maybe help you find where you may be living up to this or failing to. Do you think on things that are true? Are you looking to find the truth, even if it disagrees with your current perception? In your mind, are you actively seeking a perspective that has a correct assessment of all the facts, or do you allow your emotions or other passions to take over and govern your thoughts? Do you ever work yourself into a frenzy because you're feeding thoughts that aren't true? Do you meditate on things that are honorable? Could your thought life be put on display to the people you care about for them to see? Are you intentionally turning your mind towards things that bring honor that is due to all parties involved, or do you look for ways to dishonor people? Are you dwelling on the right in your thoughts? Do you pursue a perspective of fairness for all parties involved? Or do you focus on one set of facts and show partiality to other people when it's not fair? Of these three thoughts, which one of these is the weakest for you? Is it the truth? Is it the honor? Is it the right? Which one are you most likely to violate in your mind? Choose to focus on that one and bring your thoughts to where they meet the standard of Christ in this area. Thank you so much for joining us today on 15 Minutes in a Big Idea. Today's big idea: Christ expands categories of good.